Welcome to PodCasket.
This is a question I'm just curious about. When you've got downtime and you're just sitting waiting and you've got your phone, is there a game on your phone that you play?
So I have one game on my phone, and it's called Twist. Have you ever played that game?
No.
It's just this game where the ball is just like jumping from one paddle to the other. It's the only game I have on my phone. I don't really play many games on the phone at all, but that's one. I think Adam put it on there years ago, and I got this high score like back in like 2015. And if I ever pull that game out, it just like sucks me in for 30 minutes trying to beat that 9-year-old high score.
Yeah.
I actually paid like $6 to like update the game years ago just so I could keep that high score. But no, I don't really play many games.
That's awesome. Twist. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Let's check it out. Okay, well, tell us your story. So, I mean, you know the premise, but PodCasket is telling the history of death care through the eyes of the legends and icons that built it. And, I mean, you and I have known each other for at least 15 years now or more, and competed several times in the past. But regardless of that, I've always had a good friendship. And but yeah, you've done so many things. So if you would just, I mean, before you even get into your work history, like in death care specifically, just start with where you're born, family situation, all that growing up, school.
Yes. Yeah. So I was born actually in Portland, Oregon. That's where my mom was from. My dad was from Wisconsin. So I moved to Wisconsin when I was early. That's where all my family's from. Grew up on a farm, pretty typical rural story. Milk cows before school, after school, did all that dairy farm stuff. You're just born into it. The one thing I knew about it is that I didn't want to do it. There was we saw a lot of stuff in the farming industry. Like, it sounds kind of crazy, but like the way they grade milk, right? So, there was a lot of things that were changing. And so the pricing was changing. You had to put in like this big infrastructure to get the best price. And I saw a lot of, that was probably my first foray into any kind of consolidation. I saw a lot of farmers selling out because they couldn't afford to upgrade their facilities to be able to get, the best pricing and all that other stuff. And so, anyway, all I knew is that I didn't want to do it. I mean, it was a thankless job. It was, there was no downtime. There was no anything. And then, you factor in and you layer in Wisconsin winters, which have gotten more mild over the years. But back then, I mean, it was just like, we had our cars, you plugged your car in, but they weren't electric, right? You plugged your car in to keep the block warm so your oil didn't freeze. Anyway, I just knew I didn't want to do that. So when I got out of school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I got into sales, right? I sold vacuum cleaners for a long time, and believe it or not, I mean, that's kind of how I kind of got my teeth.
Door to door?
Door to door, yeah, and the blinding snow on commission, and I'm probably more grateful for that experience, Curtis, than anything else, because I believe that if you can sell, you can figure anything out, right? And so whether it's yourself or a product or an idea or whatever, I think just having the ability to really, convince somebody of something that you believe in. And I had a friend of mine that was selling hot tubs at the time, and what a stark difference, because I was selling something nobody wanted, and he was selling something everybody wanted. And I'm like, well, I want to sell something everybody wants, So anyway, so sales to me, I didn't go to college. Nobody in my family went to college. It just wasn't a thing that you did. So I didn't really have kind of a career path to go down. But I had people that I knew went to college and people that were making a lot of money. But so for me, sales was the great equalizer, right? Like I could dial up my effort and my skill set, and then that would sort of normalize, the income. And so I got pretty good at sales. And then I got into technology, and I've always been more on the design side. So I really liked design. I recognized good design before I even knew I wanted to be a designer. I just saw something. I thought, well, that's really elegant, or that's a good user experience, or just little things that I was probably the only one in the restaurant thinking about that, right? Or in the car wash or wherever I would always see these little things that I thought were, good design, whether it was physical design or graphic design. So I always liked design. And then, when I got a computer, I don't know, sometime in the 90s, I got Photoshop or whatever, and then started tinkering with design. And I've always been entrepreneurial. So I remember designing resumes for people, and doing just different little things. And then that's kind of how I fell into technology, really was kind of through design. So
Like design, like, so were you like a contractor? You're charging people to design things
yeah,
for them is what you were doing at the time?
yeah. And it was pretty simple. I mean, it was just like, PageMaker or, some of these other little programs you could get a hold of. And, for me, it was easy to find, like, I don't know, it'd be like a local business that wanted a brochure or something, right? Or a business card or something, just really super basic stuff that now you could do in Canva in like 9 seconds. But at the time,
Mm-hmm.
People would want something, and I mean, I could design it, and I would design it, and they would typically love it, because I had a better eye than they did, and I sort of taught myself the skills to do it. And I also learned too that design was subjective, right? I designed something that I thought was stunning, and somebody would say, "Well, that's terrible," you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned that it was subjective, but it generated revenue, And to me, I was like, "Well, I could get to do something I like to do, and somebody would pay me for it." So it was kind of the first foray into that.
Were you still in Wisconsin at that time? Or?
Yeah. And then I moved down to, no, I'm sorry, I wasn't. I was here. I moved down to North Carolina in 93. There was a company I was working for, a sales company that moved me down here. And I really didn't want to come down here, but they offered me to come down to Wilmington, which is about an hour from where I'm at now. And my brother at the time was in Okinawa, Japan in the military. And I remember they made me an offer, and I was thinking about it and praying about it. And I told him, I said, I'll let you know on Monday. And then my brother, who I hadn't heard from in a couple of months because he was in Okinawa, called and said, hey, they're going to move me back to the States. And we said, where are you going? And he said, Jacksonville, North Carolina. And I looked on the map, and they were about an inch apart. And I said, well, if you go, I'll go. So that's how we both ended up. We're both still here to this day, right? And that was,
Oh, wow.
30 years ago. Yeah, so it's wild. Yeah. So,
That's pretty cool.
yeah, so that's kind of how I got into into technology, and then particularly how I got into funeral service was in the early 2000s. I started not really a company, but I was just sort of a solopreneur doing website design. So again, I sort of took the design side, and to me at the time, websites weren't. I think they used the word dynamic back then. A lot of them were just static sites, right? It was just HTML, and you just built basically online brochures, and so I was building websites for pretty much anybody that would pay me, and it was, I would sort of put my name out there and say, if you don't want a website, which is pretty easy pickings, honestly, because not a lot of people had websites back in 2004, 2005. It sounds crazy now, but they just didn't. Such a
Was
different
this a
time.
side hustle? Like, was this like a side hustle you
No,
were
that was
doing
it.
with another job? This is all your, or this is all
That
yours?
was it. Yeah, that was it. And so I sort of said, well, I could either go sell products for other companies, right? And then do this on the side, but I have to have time to go sell this. So I'll just spend all day long selling and all night long designing. And that's what I did, right? So I just said, I think, I don't know, one of my strengths, I think, is just being willing to stay up late, and do the work. So I would just go out on the road all day long, kind of selling my website services. And then I would go home and eat dinner with the family. When they would go to bed, I would just sit there and just crank away on the stuff all night long. So I was at the time selling website services again for pretty much anybody who paid me. I remember we did one for a guy who bred coon dogs, right? I mean,
Wow.
he was trading. He was like he's still to this day, he's a huge breeder around here, but he was breeding, selling dogs all over the country, and wanted a website about breeding dogs. And then another one was a local office supply company. And so basically it was just like anybody that would just contract with you, right? It was just, design, build, sell, invoice, repeat, And the downside of that was it was a lot like, honestly, when you're selling vacuums, like you're only as good as your last sale. You really weren't building any enterprise value. You weren't building any repeat business. You weren't building anything. You're just trading time for money, which is what I was doing, right? And then one day, which kind of changed the trajectory of my life, I was invited to a local, I think it was a chamber meeting, or a Kiwanis meeting, I can't remember, and asked to speak about, I'm sorry. On the side, I did have one side hustle as I was teaching computers at the local college here, right? Which is really funny because I didn't go to college, but they asked me to teach these continuing ed classes on computers. So I was teaching like Excel and intro to the internet. This is way, way, way back. And so somebody had been in one of my classes, and they'd asked me to speak at this luncheon. So I go to this luncheon and I speak on the internet or website design. I can't even remember what. And at the end of it, a funeral home owner came up to me and said, "Hey, can you call me? I want to talk to you about building a website for my funeral home." And that literally changed my life right there. That one thing. And so I was like, "Yeah, you got money, like like that was it." And I remember that night going home, and my now ex-brother-in-law was a funeral director at the time. That's the only thing I knew about funeral service was I had a member of the family that was in the funeral business. So I said to him, "Hey, does your funeral home have a website?" And he said, "No." And I'm like, "Why would anybody really want one?" And he really didn't have an answer for me. So I went online and looked at a bunch of different funeral home websites. And so I met with her and made a deal with her to build this funeral home website. And so I built it, and she loved it. And I put my name on the bottom of it. And there's a couple things that happened here that were interesting, Curtis. One is at the time, and again, your first guest, Turk, right? He had websites out there. Now, I wasn't the first one by any means. Funeral One was out there. There was a couple others out there. But I didn't know how to build anything they had built. So this lady obviously wanted obituaries on the website. So back then there were webmasters, right? So any updates, there was no content management system at all, so any updates you wanted to make on your website, the person who built your website had to do it. So I don't know why, but I agreed to her. I said, "Look, I'll build you the website. No recurring revenue at all here. I'll build you the website. And if you have obituaries you want to put on there, send them to me. I'll throw them on there for you." Which is a really dumb idea.
With no fees for that. Like, I'm just going to do that for you for free.
I didn't even understand. Yeah, I didn't even understand that. Wasn't even thinking that. I just really wanted this contract to build her website. So she starts sending me emails every day with these obituaries. And so then the next day she would always send me revisions because Sally's name was spelled wrong or whatever. And then, do you remember the Citadel group with,
Lanny, Danny and Lanny?
Yeah. So there was a biz dev guy they had there by the name of Tom Folkert, and Tom, which I don't even know if he's still in the business. He worked with, I think he worked with Procoa for a while, but great guy. Tom worked for the Citadel as their COO or one of their business development guys. He saw my name on the bottom of this website and then called me up. So I built one website, and the next phone call I get is a guy asking me to build 14. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing, And so I built one for him, and I noticed something that was amazing to me is that I already kind of knew what a funeral website needed to be. And I was able to reuse about half of the code that I'd written for the first one, right? So it kind of took everything in half. And so I really learned right then that, boy, if I could just keep doing funeral home websites, like I can shave my work, way down and deliver a product. So honestly, that's kind of how I got into the funeral business. But what really happened was, so fast forward, now I got about 6 or 7 websites that are emailing me every day, these obituaries. So I'm now spending an hour every night adding these obituaries. So I was creating a new HTML page for every obituary. And then so I'm not a coder, that I'm a designer, but I did at that time, through sheer necessity, had to figure out how to write a little PHP program that would let the funeral homes add their own obituaries. And that's really when I realized that, well, if they like this, then maybe some other people can like it. So after that, I stopped selling to anybody else. At the time, I probably would have taken on a customer outside the funeral service, but I knew then that there's probably a need here. And so my brother-in-law, the funeral director at the time, handed me the yellow book. I'd never seen the yellow book before. He handed me a little mini yellow book. Do you remember those little tiny ones?
Yeah.
So he hands me the mini yellow book. And I'm like, this is fantastic. So I'm literally, drawing a circle around my town, looking up and calling every funeral home in the town, in the area. And I just kept going wider and wider. And my pitch literally was, do you have a website? No. Would you like me to come and talk to you? And they would almost always say yes, because I think they all knew they needed a website. So honestly, it was just more, it wasn't me. It was just timing. Anybody in the business, anybody building websites at that time could have made that same phone call. They'd have got that same meeting and they would have got the contract. So it was more just a timing thing for me, but that was it. So I was off to the races. So then I incorporated a business name and I was in the funeral business.
That's awesome. I think it's important to interject on the yellow book, like the yellow book and the red book are not just a phone book, but one just listing funeral homes across the United States, right? So that was the whole.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Not just a typical yellow book, what we think of like a phone book, but
right,
like numerous publications with their yellow book is excellent. We do the same thing. I mean, just hand that to the first sales guy and say, just start dialing.
That's
so
it.
That's pretty.
Yeah,
that's pretty awesome.
That's crazy fun.
Yeah. So, okay, you've told a story though that happened around this moment, probably in time. I think it'd be funny for others to hear. One of the first sites you built, and copying some code from like another page, or another website you'd built. And, you know
Yeah,
what I'm talking about?
about the phone number.
Yeah, I think the phone number, maybe even just
Or,
like
or
the
the or
page, the
the
page
menu.
description or something. Yeah, the
Yeah,
menu.
yeah.
Yeah. Maybe tell that story.
Yeah, so I didn't know how to code, so I know how to design. So it was pretty easy. Like, so if it's just a flat design, I could make it look amazing. But now I needed to put this thing on the web in the browser, which means I needed to know how to, write HTML, which I didn't. And I learned a little bit, but I didn't. So I found that you could just like right click, hit view source, copy all this code, put it in a notepad, publish it, and it would like show up. It was amazing. And then I would just change things, right? I would just change colors, change logos and everything. But I didn't know anything about like a meta description or titles or any of that kind of stuff. And so I found this really, really cool seafood restaurant. I mean, this website was amazing. Like, it looked so good. And I thought, I could just like replace this lobster picture, with like a picture of the funeral home. And I could like change like the chef to the funeral director, and I could just like, it's amazing. And so I showed it to him and it was wonderful. And I published it and then it got indexed. And then, I don't know, it was a little while later, the funeral home called me up and said, like, I got customers calling me, like people calling me, like wanting to know about a reservation. And, they said I had like the best seafood in town. And like, we don't know where all this confusion's coming from. And then, so like I Googled it, it was like, ABC funeral home. And it's like, fresh halibut, like, so I learned you can't really do that.
That's awesome.
That's
So,
such a fun. I forgot about that.
so at this point, were you already, because you're like a trader when it comes to domains, buying and selling domains, were you already buying them? Is this kind of when that would have started? Or
No, so I started buying and selling domains back in like '99, I think. Kind of actually maybe even '98. I know at the time I was buying them, they were $70 each, which is
wow,
bonkers. Yeah,
more
and
than
then
they
they
are now.
and they went down. I think in like 2000, I think they went down to like $35. But yeah, I got on the domain thing. I ended up buying a domain. So I had one of the companies that I started in my life was a company called Backyard Builders, and I never really got off the ground, but I'm kind of handy with my hands, and so we were going to be like building these sheds, right? These outdoor buildings. And I thought, like Lowe's is selling these buildings, really weren't selling that many, but I thought we could just do like these on-site builds. So I had a friend of mine who were going to start, making these, pre-build these things in our backyard and like show up at Curtis's house and like back the truck up and set one of these things up. So glad that thing never worked out. I did not want to be in that business. But I bought the domain backyardbuilders.com, which is a great name, right? Great alliteration,
Yeah.
paid $70 for it. Didn't know anything about domains at the time at all. And I had the domain for probably maybe 3 weeks. And somebody from Connecticut, a backyard builders in Connecticut, calls me up and says, "Hey, you got my domain?" I'm like, "No, I got my domain." He said, "I'm Backyard Builders." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I got my domain." Long story short, he didn't like me, but he offered me $500 for the domain. I was like, okay, that was pretty quick. So we haggled. And anyway, I ended up selling the domain to him for like $3,000. Now, I wasn't squatting on the domain. I actually had a company called Backyard Builders. But I realized, pretty quickly that, boy, people like these domains. So that's kind of how I got into the domain business. And then I bought a bunch, around, vacuums and hospitality and some different stuff. And at the time, now there's this massive, massive marketplace, right, for domains, right, with GoDaddy auctions and Afternic and some of these other ones. But at the time, there really wasn't. So most of the domains were all outbound. So I would like buy these domains and I would just call up your company and say, "Hey, look, do you want this domain?" And the conversion was incredibly good. And so I was just flipping these domains. That's how I got into the domaining world. So I've been doing it I don't flip domains now, but I mean, I bought and sold hundreds and hundreds of them at the time. That's why I really sort of got excited about them.
And what are some of the, like, I mean, are there any domains you sold where you're like, man, I wish I held on to that one, or any stories that kind of stick out?
That's a good question. I'd have to go back and look. I forget about so many of them that I owned. I can't think of any right now, honestly.
You've owned a lot in the funeral space.
Yeah, I sort of bought a lot around the funeral space. Yeah. I mean, we owned cremation.com for a while. That was probably the holy grail of all. And that's kind of the one that I always wanted to get, and got that one. That took a while. But yeah, there's been, to me, it wasn't so much like flipping the domain, particularly in the funeral space, right? Before that, it was just like anybody I could flip it to, I flip it to. The funeral space, I think it had a lot more to do. I read an article one time that said that really said that, if you're going to own a space, you should really own the domain. Like, so for example, like I think Procter and Gamble owns toothpaste.com, right? Like Honda owns motorcycle.com, and so a lot of these big companies would own these domain names. Like Bank of America owns loans.com. And so I sort of thought to myself that, if you're going to be in a space, having the domain, particularly the .com, just gives you instant credibility. I think to this day it does, right? Like there's a lot of arguments right now that, the domain doesn't matter because search is so good. And that's true to some degree, because back in the day, there was a lot of value in type-in traffic, right? Because people didn't search, like they would just go to the URL and type it in there. And so it's got far less type-in value, but I think what it does do is it does add credibility, right? So, if you're going to be, I don't know, whatever, pick any industry, and then take that category killing keyword domain, and if you call, an investor or a high value client or whatever, you own that .com, like there's a company I follow called calm.com, CALM, right? They're a meditation app. They're a unicorn now, but so I think they're probably worth $2 billion now. But they were smart enough to own that domain. Do you know what I mean? And like that domain, literally the investors will tell you that them owning that domain was a huge reason. They put that early seed money in that company. I think because it's a signal to the investor that if you can hustle your way into getting that domain, right? If you're willing to put your money on the line, to own that domain or figure out how to get that domain, I don't know. It's a sell or it's a tell, right? It's a signal. And I think like when you own, I don't know, like cremation.com, for example, right? If I was going to call up a vendor in the industry or a partner and say, hey, look, I'm with cremation.com versus I'm with, cremationusa.com or whatever, like there's just value in owning that. So for me, when I got in the funeral space, I started acquiring, funeral related domain names for that reason. Because if I wanted to, partner with somebody, or if I wanted to like have a product out there, like we're aftercare.com, right? I wouldn't want to be anything else. You know what I mean? Like you want to own that if you can.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's a big deal. So from starting building all the websites, that was when you incorporated as Director's Advantage, or was it another name? And then what since then? Like all the.
Well, I'll gloss over any of, but like the two big ones for us were websites, videos, and then aftercare. And there was a couple in between there, right? And it's a funny story. It took probably 10 years for me to settle on one. And if we're going to talk about some of the lessons I learned, it's about like the power of focus, like figure out what works and then go all in, which is what I finally did with aftercare. I've had a whole bunch of, funeral related businesses all under Director's Advantage, right? We made a lot of small bets a lot through the years. Just trying to figure out kind of how we could serve the funeral home better, not trying to figure out what would make us the most money, but like where we could add the most value, right? With our skill set. And so we tried a bunch of different things, but videos, which was a huge part of the story. So we started building websites, and then, look, I've made a career out of saying yes and figuring it out later. Like that's my whole thing. Because I didn't have the tech background or the collegiate background or any of that. So I just figured if I saw an opportunity, I would say yes, and then I'd stay up late, right? I'd figure it out. And so a funeral home, we built a website for a funeral home right up the road up here. And they called me one day. The website hadn't been live a month, and they called me one day and they said, hey, do you do those video tributes? I was like, yeah, we do them. I'd never done a video in my life. And they're like, they said, could you come by and get some pictures and make a video? I'm like, yeah, I can do it. I said, when's the video? Or when's the funeral? And they said, Sunday. And this was a Friday at like 3 o'clock. So I get in my car and I drive 45 miles to their funeral home and hand me this envelope full of photos. This envelope smelled like smoke. These photos were horrible, right? Stick together. There was gum on some of them. It was so bad. Now, it's important to note, I'd never scanned a photo in my life. I'd never made a video in my life. I'd never burned a DVD in my life. Wow. But it's Friday at like 5, and I got till Sunday at 1. I can do this, So yeah. I literally go to the store. I bought a DVD burner, bought a scanner. Like I've been home. I tell my wife at the time, I'm like, I can't do anything this weekend. I got till Sunday. And it took me like 48 hours to make this video. And I found this janky software Photos were all crooked. The poor guy, gosh, I'll never forget this guy. His last name is Chance. He got hit by a train twice.
Oh my gosh.
He got hit by a train twice. He ran into a train. The train hit him. The train didn't know they hit him. He falls onto the track. The second train that actually runs him over, they're the ones that recognize they ran somebody over, but he'd been dead for hours on the track. I'll never forget this guy.
Gosh.
So I don't know. So I do this video, and I'm like rolling up to this funeral home at like noon on Sunday, and they had rented a TV. There was no TV in this chapel. They'd rented this television. They just wheeled in this big screen from Aaron's Rent-A-Center,
Wow.
and I'm in there and I'm just praying like, Jesus, please let this video work. Right. Because at my house, it was hit or miss, man. Sometimes it was working, sometimes it wasn't. And we put that thing in there. And so this is the second pivotal moment in my career. That video played. Thank God that video played. But what I saw in the faces of those people, right, that to me was like, oh, wow, and then I'm like, I make videos and we need a video, like it was wild. And so, yeah, so that's how we got into the video business. I started making videos, and I quickly learned like we need software around this. So we actually hired somebody to kind of build some software that would send us, the photos. And unlike what you guys did and what Funeral One was doing, was you guys made software that made the videos. We were actually making the videos, right? So they would send us the photos. We would clean the photos up, and we got very, very good at it. But it was a turnaround, right? They would send us the stuff. We would make the video and send them back the MP4 that they would download and burn, and and then play. But yeah, so we grew that, and we ended up doing a couple thousand videos a month, and it was a great business. It took a while to sort of iron that out, because we had to create processes and efficiencies to make sure that, because like every time they would send an order in, we'd have to make sure that, which one was the cover photo, right? What song do you want? What theme do you want? Whatever. So we realized that once we kind of wrote software around it and forced these answers, right, it made the process a lot simpler. And so we had a lot of stuff to do. And then another pivotal moment was this is kind of a funny story, but we were doing, I don't know, maybe 100 videos a month, literally, that was it. And somebody told me that Stewart Enterprise at the time was looking for somebody to do videos for a couple hundred funeral homes. I'm like, I can do this, right? So I wrangled my way into a meeting with these guys. And at the time, they were outsourcing it to some little shop in Atlanta who was, I don't know, pretty expensive. So I wrangled my way into a meeting with these guys, and they agreed to do this demo, right? I'm like, I got this. Now, you have to understand, I have 2 employees. I've got me and Denise. That's it. And the day I'm getting ready to do this demo, Denise calls in sick. I'm like, oh, crap, right? So I get ready to do this demo, and we're doing a GoToMeeting. That's how long ago this was. This was 2008. And I like lock my front door and like fire this meeting up. And the UPS man is out there like, banging on the door, trying to open the door. And I'm like, I got this line 2 on hold. You can hear the, in my ear. I cannot believe I even ended up getting through that thing. But somehow, by the grace of God, somehow they said, okay, we'll let you pilot this for 40 funeral homes.
Wow.
I'm like, I got it. I got it. You know what I mean? And so, and it was crazy, but yeah, we stayed up and I hired a couple people, and anyway, we figured it all out. So that went,
and when that was at its peak, I mean, how many people did that take for you to handle a few thousand videos a month? I mean,
so we had like 5 people. Yeah. So we were doing, one person could do like 15 videos a day. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It was pretty quick. So we used Sony Vegas was the software you used, and it was built on .NET. So we learned to script that. You know what I mean? So you could we brought stuff in batches, and like you could drop it in the system, and it would like arrange all the photos, and it would set all the transitions. And so basically it was more of and we automated a lot of the cleanup on the photos, and we really got it down too. I mean, you could knock a video out in, 6 or 7 or 8 minutes, you know what I mean? As opposed to, hours and hours. Because I remember when I was just doing the videos myself, if we get like one day with like 12 videos, it would take me like 3 or 4 hours. Like I'd be up till 2 a.m, cleaning up photos. And so, and then we built all of the like covers and DVD covers and the sleeves and all that. We built that in Illustrator, and so you could script that. And so, and we automated a ton of it, or at least created as much efficiency in the process, as we could. And then that, there's probably a lesson in here too for other entrepreneurs, but we really took the focus off of websites. We were still building websites, but when we got that Stewart Enterprise account, we went from, a few funeral homes doing videos to now 40. And then like a month later, they gave us all 225. And so that just became our focus. And so really we were Director's Advantage, but we were really just an outsourced shop for Stewart Enterprise. Like we just focused almost exclusively on that customer. And that went very well. It was very good for them. It was very good for us. I saved a ton of money. I was a very good steward of it. And then I'll never forget the day. It was May 31st, 2013. It was Memorial Day weekend, 2013. I picked my phone up off the nightstand and saw an announcement that SCI had acquired Stewart. And so I knew one of two things was going to happen. Either we were going to lose the Stewart account or we were going to acquire the SCI account, and I was an optimist. So I'm like, let's go get some desks, so it didn't work out that way. It took about maybe 7 or 8 months, and that sort of unwound, right? They sort of, because they had that MEM product and, they were doing it all in-house at the time. So that was an important moment too for us, because I then had to figure out what to do. So as we turned our attention back toward websites, CFS had come on the scene and blown past us. Funeral One was, crushing it. Frazier was crushing it. Everybody was just so far ahead of us. Like it was just almost impossible to get caught up. So I sort of went back to the drawing board and said, where can we add value, to the funeral home owners? And the one thing, Curtis, that I've always done is tried to really be a student of the business, right? So even though I was just doing videos, I've always studied the business, right? Every angle completely. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? I know sales and I understand the pre-need path, so I thought, well, maybe what we could do is build some pre-need products, that would help them in the sales cycle. And so that was what eventually ended up being aftercare, because one of the things we recognized during that was, we sort of just said, oh, look, what are all the lead sources for pre-need? Where are they coming from, whether it's direct mail, lunch and learns, seminars, whatever. And then the one lead source that seemed to be the most valuable was coming from the families you've served before, and so everybody sort of agreed that that's right. But then when I would say, well, why don't you, why isn't this something everybody's going after? Then it would realize that, it just wasn't, they just didn't have the tools to do it, or, it took a lot of resources the funeral homes didn't have. And so that's where we sort of ended up, recognizing an opportunity within aftercare that we could fill that need for them.
Yeah, there were I remember back in those times, and you came to NFDA, I think 3 or 4 years in a row, the entirely different business, different booth. There was a Memory Links booth.
Yeah.
There was a pre-need builders booth, which is you're talking about this pre-need stuff, and then aftercare.com, of course, shipouts.com.
Yeah.
Is another one I remember. I remember that. No, and I've always admired that, how, just your ability to pivot and recognize an opportunity and just go all in on it. And I think, you've hit it on it a few times here. Is just that willingness to stay up late and work and figure stuff out. I don't know. It's pretty cool times. And I remember, and maybe you remember this story or not, because I feel like, and you had Funeral Cast too, which you didn't mention. So you and I were competing in webcasting back in 08 or 09.
Yep, that's right.
And that's when we first met. And, and then we built a video creation software, and we were competing on the video side of things. And, I remember if that was 2013 when the Stewart Enterprise deal got acquired, it was probably that same year or within a year of that purchase. I remember thinking I'm going to go ask Ellery if he'd sell his video business to us, because we were new, we were growing, and it was I knew you had that Stewart account. I knew we were just not going to get in there.
Yeah.
And I remember asking you that, and just like the look on your face is if there was ever a moment where I felt like you didn't like me, it was when I asked if we could buy your video business. You're like, no, absolutely not. No. And then, yeah, that would have killed us.
I remember that conversation. We were actually in Charlotte is where we were. It was in 2012 is where we were.
NFDA. And
I think because I think we were promoting Ship Out at that time. And I think you were probably like, well, he's not, focused on the videos or whatever. But yeah, that was wild. It's a crazy
that would have killed us, man, because we were already 2012 was the toughest year of our business. And if we probably wouldn't have even had money to buy you, but if it would have worked out and then we would have lost Stewart, I would gonna have to go back to work somewhere. So
Yeah, that's so funny, man. People don't realize how different it was. You know, just back then. I mean, things you take for granted, like Mike was talking on your first episode about, like, how you had to literally, when he started, you're literally handcrafting these websites. I mean, it's like artisan stuff, I mean, it's very, very manual, very laborious. And when I was doing it, it wasn't quite that bad. We had products like Dreamweaver and, some other stuff, but I mean, still, which if I didn't have that, I never would have been able to build anything because I wasn't a coder. But I mean, it wasn't. Now you got Wix. I mean, like I can give an AI prompt and spin up a website now in like 9 seconds. And at the time,
yeah.
it just wasn't, or even the idea of updating your own website. I mean, it seems so foreign now. You have to email somebody, to update your website. But it was just a very, very different time. And the one thing I recognized early on was that, these funeral directors are, ministerial in most cases. Like they just want to go in and serve families. It's all they want to do. And I remember, like, one of your questions to me was like, what's changed in the funeral service? Cadillac did a big campaign years ago that said, this isn't your daddy's Cadillac. You know what I mean? Like, things are different. And I've always thought about that in terms of the funeral home. You know what I mean? Like, the funeral home you run today, this isn't your father's funeral home. It's very different, right? At the core, you're serving families, but everything outside of those two words right there is different, And so what I recognized was you've got these funeral home owners, these directors that, are ministerial in nature, right? They're caregivers. They want to go in and do that. Now they got to be video editors, and now they got to be figure out a website, right? Now they got to figure out Facebook marketing and all this other stuff. And I walked into a funeral home one day, Curtis. I'll never forget this guy. And I said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about a website for your funeral home." And he said, "I don't even like computers." And I'm like, "It's kind of not for you."
Yeah.
It's like, and I really want to say, well, do you like bodies in the back? You know what I mean? Because that's the whole purpose of this. But I really realized he was so frustrated that day. You know what I mean? Because now here's a guy that just wants to go serve families, and now he's got to think about a website. You know what I mean? And when he went to school at Gupton Jones in probably 1965, you know what I mean? Like, none of this was on the radar. None of it was, right? Like, he was taught to put a suit on at 2 a.m. to make a removal. You know what I mean? And, back then, if you didn't drive a hearse to the house in the middle of the night to make a removal, you're going to hell. You know what I mean? Like, there were rules. So it's not the same funeral home now at all. And I think the same thing, too, when it comes to, like, the entrepreneurs that, we serve the funeral home now. I mean, we're not serving the same funeral home we served 20 years ago, right? Everything is so different. And, your ability to pivot, to recognize opportunities, to draft off tailwinds, you know what I mean? To get out of the way of these headwinds sometimes. I mean, you feel like you're in the UFC ring sometimes, and, sometimes you're winning and most times you're not, but you only got to be right a few times, and so for me, I had probably 10 years of really extremely valuable experience learning the funeral business, literally inside out. I feel like I could do a lot of the work except the embalming. I feel like I can meet with families and all the other stuff, but and ultimately what ended up giving us success was aftercare, because we finally, figured out where we could add the most value, and then really, get a fire going and pour gas on that fire. And everything else was, either wrong product, right time, right product, wrong time. Like, you think about, like you and I talked about in 2008, we're both trying to figure out webcasting. Like, I remember I bought the domain funeralcast.com. I thought it was a genius. I started pitching the idea, and people are like, "Are you making a movie about funerals?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not making a movie about funerals. Why would you think that?" And Eric said, "Because it's funeral cast." I'm like, "I know, but clearly that means streaming, doesn't it?" No, it didn't. It was just a bad move. But, I'm trying to tell these funeral directors, like in 2008, 2009, that, people are going to want to watch funerals online. And they're like, "You're an idiot. Get out of the room. Boo." You know what I mean? It was like the bad comic, And, again, it was the right product, the wrong time. And it's kind of like with memory links, right? We launched that in 2012. Back then, QR codes were, we're doing very well with it now, but we didn't really have a lot of success with it then for a couple of reasons. One, most people didn't even know what a QR code was at the time, right? Your phones didn't scan them natively. You actually had to download an app that would scan a barcode. And then our distribution model, we made a mistake, and we're trying to sell it through monument dealers. These people literally like chisel into stone for a living. You know what I mean? So they weren't the best, salespeople when it came to a technology product that a family may or may not understand. You know what I mean? So again, right product, wrong time. Now everyone knows what a QR code is. Your phone scan them natively. People think it's a great idea. So it was, a lot of it is just, timing. So,
Yeah, and COVID, it's like interesting because you hit on two things that COVID accelerated live streaming and accelerated QR codes because we didn't have printed menus for a year, right?
yep,
So you had a QR code on the table at a restaurant, and it
yep,
was just like I remember watching QR codes and thinking like, yeah, this is kind of old school tech, even like 6-7 years ago. I'm like, that's it's going to be NFC, it's going to be these other um, contactless like kind of scanning, but then COVID just changed that. And
yeah,
COVID changed live streaming. And I think another interesting point is I've been thinking about as you've been saying all of this is, if you look at most industries and just the cost of product, there's very few where the cost of the product has gone down, like TVs, right? I mean, TVs were so expensive, computers were super expensive. They got cheaper and cheaper, or TVs now are like, I mean, I'm sure some TV companies would probably be willing to give the TV away for free because they're making money on you on the screensaver for the rest of your life, right?
yep,
And so
yep,
they're selling them at cost or at a loss. But that's interestingly enough, that's true with a lot of the technology in the funeral space, is the cost and the effort that it took 20 years ago and compared to what it's been now. I think actually you've got vendors in the space that were willing to give, be, I guess, generous in that way, where the cost of the funeral home has gone down, and a lot of these products, live streaming's gotten cheaper, free. I mean, everything's almost just like been commoditized because technology has allowed for that. That's interesting to think of that, just the change that has taken place there as well.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think about, I think one of the things you asked me about, like what have I seen change in death care, over the years. Um, I'm going to say this, and I hope I don't step on any toes saying this, but like when I started in the funeral business, when you would say, and you would talk about like threats, um, you know, like I'm not sure many of them do like a SWOT analysis, right? Not certainly not like business school stuff, but when you would talk about like the threats, there was just this, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but I think there was just sort of this attitude, like almost like an untouchable thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, and dare I say the word entitled, right? I don't, again, I'm not saying that in any way to belittle anybody, but it almost felt like, for a lot of years, I mean, maybe even call it 8 or 9 decades, right? Funeral homes had it really good when it came to like market share, right? Like you took two funeral homes, like take a town, there's two funeral homes in there. I mean, barring some public scandal or something bad, right? You were going to pick one of the two. You know what I mean? Like that was pretty much it. There really wasn't a lot of marketing that really even needed to happen. You know what I mean? Like if you died, here's a town, here's a geography, you're going to go to one of these two things, right? And I think that's why also, if you go back and look in the late 90s when SCI was running around buying funeral homes for multiples that were just bonkers, right? That's why they did that, right? Because there was a certain value that was created even by saying we have 100 calls. 100 calls was equal to this. And so what I think has changed now, obviously cremation's changed all of that, but I think what's happened now is I think the funeral home owners are much, much more aware, right, of all of the threats to that. I think they're much more aware that, hey, we need to treat this like we're a startup, right? We need to treat this like, there's no givens. You know what I mean? Like we need to go out and claw and fight and scratch for every single deal. And I wrote an article years ago about this, but I kind of took a position that if, when Katrina hit, I don't know if you remember the article that I wrote, but, when Katrina hit in 2000 or in 2005, our gas prices in North Carolina doubled literally overnight, literally, right? Because the pipeline broke, gas prices doubled everything. And what that did, I remember my ex-wife was a school teacher at the time, and I remember saying to her, hey, aren't you going the same place that bus is going? You know what I mean? Because like you can get on that bus, like, I mean, SUVs were being traded faster than stocks. I mean, trips were being canceled. It was literally like financial ice water to our face. Like it shocked us into new behavior. And I've often made the parallel, Curtis, that or the analogy that if the cremation rate in the funeral business had gone up as fast as those gas prices had gone up, right? What would the funeral service look like today? Right? Like they would have laid off staff, they'd have cut fat around the funeral home, like prices would have changed immediately. But what really happened was it wasn't that. It was a slow degradation over years, right? It's from 1980 to today, that cremation rate has kind of just done this, and then that slow, that slow pain, right, causes inaction, right? And inaction is the death knell to any business. So what you'd almost really rather have is someone just kick the crap out of you like Katrina, you know what I mean, to shock you into new behavior, because it's that slow boiling of the frog that got them. I think now we're sort of at the end of that. I think the funeral home owners now realize, we can't, like, we have to pay attention now, right? We have to do stuff now. And you're seeing a lot of succession changing things, a lot of younger people that are coming in there, a lot of people, I'm not saying younger people, but I mean, people that are just generally more aware of kind of what's going on. And not only that, but they're willing to invest in things that they never thought before. Like they're willing to invest in technology, coaching, consulting, partnering with people. Again, it's not your father's funeral home, right? And you can't run it like your father's funeral home.
Yeah. So keep running that forward. What do you think the future looks like? Like, you're a big thinker. So, thinking big, like what does the future of funeral service look like? But also just thinking like if you were opening a funeral home today, I don't know, what are some thoughts you have on that? Like what you would do or what?
So that's a really good question. I don't know operationally, I don't know, but I think that the one unlock for funeral service, and I'm saying this in a macro, I think the unlock is going to be when the funeral service providers put trust and faith in making family first experiences. And I'll try to unpack what I mean by that. So, transparency in pricing is putting the families first, right? It's dumb as crap not to have your prices online. I get it, right? Don't send me hate mail. I get it, right? But if you, and look, we've done polls on this, we've done studies on this before. I literally had people in the office one time look at 8,000 funeral home websites to see how many were putting pricing on there, right? And it was only like 1,700 of them. And then we went back and looked at that 1,700 and said, how many are putting pricing on there that's not a GPL? That's something you could actually understand. And it was like 300, And so not putting pricing on there's not, that's not being transparent. That's not putting family first, right? Not giving families tools to plan on their own. That's not putting families first. And so I think that when you can create experiences that put that family first, right? So put pricing out there, just do it in a way that they understand it. Put tools out there to let them drive the entire process and call you when necessary, But if you can do that, I think, Curtis, and make it where, you're doing it with the full faith that you're doing it for that family without the fear that it's going to disintermediate you, right? Or put you out of business, because the only reason they don't, right? I think when you do that, I think that's what becomes an unlock. When you can buy a Tesla online with like 6 clicks, but I can't even find out the price of a cremation, you know what I mean? Or I can't even, it's just, there's just this big, huge disconnect, right? And it's so frustrating. And that the start of every bad customer experience is an unmet expectation. Every single one, right? You order the Red Robin looking burger and you get the dollar burger coming out on your plate, right? That's an unmet expectation. If I go to a funeral home website, I expect to be able to find price. I expect to be able to turn knobs and dials and create my own experience. When I can't do that, that's an unmet expectation. I may not call you up and verbalize that, right? But I'm going to click backwards, right? I'm going to go somewhere else. And so I think in the business, hurt ourselves. I think that as technology providers, we build what the funeral homes allow us to build, what they'll pay us for, right? But the truth of the matter is we need to build family first experiences, right? And the funeral homes need to understand and believe and have the faith that if they build it, it's not going to put them out of business. Because the only reason they don't put their pricing online, that's a self-serving decision, isn't it? Right? Because if you ask 1,000 people, if you were planning a funeral, would you want to see the prices online? 1,000 are going to say yes, unless if one says no, he or she wasn't listening, right, to the question.
Yeah,
they're all going to say yes. So to decide not to put the pricing on there, who's that for? It's not for that consumer. It's for the funeral home. So what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to put my needs and my desires and my decisions ahead of what that family is. So I think, and this is a focus group of one, but I think if you put that family first and trust in the process and trust in that consumer, that it's not going to disintermediate you, right? And figure out how to serve that family. Look, a family can't cremate their own grandmother, right? They're not going to, they want you. You just got to stop believing that they don't want you, right? What they want, though, is they want, yeah, you need them. They just want to drive their own process, because again, consumers are trained by the best in the business, So if I go to Amazon's made it so easy to buy something, right? That if I go to any other e-com store out there, look, whether they like it or not, they're being judged by how easy Amazon made, right? So the funeral home is being judged by how easy every other service business out there makes it. And if they don't realize that, then it's to their own detriment, right? So I think that if funeral homes would, funeral home owners, again, I'm not saying this to be mean or ugly or anything. I mean, I love funeral directors, believe me. But I think that if they could get their mind wrapped around, you know what I mean, that put that family first without regard for your own, what you think is the right thing to do, and trust, you know, that they're still going to use you, I think they would. I completely believe they would. But I think that you know, we need to make stuff that's family first as tech providers. The funeral homes need to agree and pay for that, you know, and agree that that's the right thing to do. And I think that you'd see a huge shift. So that's what I'm hoping for in funeral service. Like, I think it ought to be where people ought to be able to go online and plan the entire process. Because, you know, I've told this before, but, you know, I've taken my family to Disney World before, planned the entire trip, did everything, didn't speak to a human being until I'm standing in front of somebody with ears on, you know, but I can't get a price on a funeral, right? Or I can't, you know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. When you hit the point, it's like the consumers, like you said, they're trained by the best. They're all on these other websites every day. They're buying things, they're looking at pricing. And, you know, even as another technology company buying from other technology companies, when you, or even like just really any company or even a restaurant, when a price is hard to find, or even like you go to another tech provider and it's like, you know, gold, silver, platinum, it's $59 a month, $99 a month, $199 a month. And then there's this one over here that says enterprise, call us for pricing. All of a sudden I'm like, well, that just got crazy expensive, even though it might only have gone from $199 to $249. I don't know what it is, but just the fact that I can't find it, it sends me a message that it's too expensive. They don't even dare tell me.
Yep.
Like that's the conclusion we jump to. Like a restaurant without pricing on the menu, you know, if you're price conscious, you're going to see that menu out in front of the door and you're going to walk to the next place. But the other point you made, and you said this the other day in a meeting I was in with you, where you said there's always going to be a body, right? And that's the difference between, I think, death care being disintermediated versus most every other industry. Others, like, they have been disintermediated. Weddings, all the other life events, what you buy online, and people, well, funerals are expensive. They're not going to spend that amount of money online. Yes, they would. Like you said, you can buy a car, you can buy a house. Like, how many of us have bought a car or a house without ever seeing it in person because we bought it through the internet? Like, we're willing to do that as consumers. And so the fact that there's this like requirement, which is the body, that brings them to the funeral home. Yeah. The funeral home has this now opportunity to build trust. Yeah. And I think that's super important because it could change. I mean, obviously the body's always going to be there to make the intro, but I went to a conference in like 2016 or 2017, I don't remember, over in Europe. And I was blown away by how different it was from the US in the sense that the funeral home was a storage facility. They didn't plan the event. They didn't like even host the event. That was done either by a celebrant or a church or a local, like the crematoriums were owned by the government, right? I mean, there are these, and I was just like, this is insane. And the thought that I had is I was like, we could get there. Like the US could get there if the funeral home doesn't maintain the trust with the consumer. And, you know, I'm like you, like I love funeral directors. I love this industry. This my whole professional career has been built in it. Some of my best friends are funeral directors. But yeah, just that the takeaway here for all of us, no matter who, is put yourself in the customer's shoes. That's right. Walk yourself as the customer through the process, and what would your expectation be, and try to meet it or exceed it, or, you know, surprise them.
Yeah.
And that'll be like the customer satisfaction will be off the charts if you can do that.
No, I agree 100%. Again, I don't think that the funeral directors are being like, you know, they're digging their heels in, right? Or they're obstinate about it, right? I think a lot of them are just like, I'm scared, right? Like, I don't really know what to do because, you know, and Doug Gober talks about this all the time. Like, you know, they don't realize how the enterprise value of their funeral home is going down over the years, you know, because even though their call volume may maintain, because again, you know, think about this, and this is something I talk about all the time. Everybody talks about the cremation rate. the cremation rate's not the issue, right? It's the direct cremation rate. Cremation rate's going like this. The direct cremation rate's going like that. That's the one that would scare the crap out of me. That's one you can fall off of and get hurt, right? I mean, nobody cares about a cremation if you're doing an $8,000 service, right? Nobody cares. Like everybody, I'll take that all day, right? So, but I think if they can't, I think they're just scared, right? And they're scared to say, hey, I'm going to build these family first experiences and trust that I'm still going to be needed, So I think a lot of them just sort of, hold it to the guard and say, if you call the funeral home, I want you to come in, right? Because that's what I was taught. And you're the consumer going, why would I need to come in? Like that's crazy, And then I think you've got some of them that are just honestly not self-aware enough to realize kind of what the consumer's needs might be. I'll give you one quick example. And I got some more time if you need it. But I was at a funeral home one time. It was me and the funeral home owner and just the two of us in the building. And the phone rings and he answers it and he said, funeral home. I think he forgot the name of his funeral home. He said, funeral home. And there was like a couple moments of silence and he said, $11.95 plus $14 a death certificate. And there was a couple moments of silence. He said, okay. And he hung the phone up. And I remember thinking two things really clearly. One, I could automate that. Like, no worries. Like, if that's all, you press one for a price, I can do that. And two, I thought, just like you shouldn't be able to complain about politics if you don't vote, I thought you should give up your right to complain about anything in your market if that's all you're going to do when somebody answers that phone, right? Because people don't call up a funeral home for fun, right? So you either had somebody on that phone that somebody had died, is about to die, right? Or you got somebody who's really thinking things through and, like you had a lead on that phone, right? And you left that. And I guarantee you they didn't put that phone down and say, oh, you know what? I'm going to forget about this death, right?
Yeah.
No one really died. Forget it. No, they're going to pick that phone up. They're going to dial somebody else, and then you're going to blame the fat guy down the street, right? Or you're going to blame the low price guy down the street. And you literally did nothing to try to secure that sale. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So we can blame it on a lot of things, but we also have to look inward, right? And say, okay, what are we doing? And so you could be the best lead gen source out there. And like I've talked to Welton about this 100 times, like you can drive a lot of people to make your phone ring. But if that's what you're going to give somebody on the other end of the phone, it's awful. It's awful. So now think about this. You got a funeral director with a website without a price on it, right? So you have to dial the number. So you dial the number and that's what you get. We dial that number. Well, that guy doesn't deserve the call. You know what I mean? He doesn't deserve the call, and that customer doesn't deserve that kind of experience.
Yeah.
We just don't. So
yeah. No, great points. Great points. You left out a lot of your one-liners. We'll do that at another time. See how many one-liners we could jam into a conversation. But to kind of close off, I got one last question for you, which is, and this could be business related or not, is just tell us something about, well, you didn't talk about your hobbies, but tell us something about you that would surprise all of us.
Well, I only have one real hobby right now, and that's pickleball. It's like my new obsession. It's been for the last couple of years. I absolutely love it. Play every chance I get. I'm getting ready to go play when I hang the phone up here. One thing that you would not know, most people would not know that I quit high school. So I'm a dropout. Kind of weird to say. It was a stupid idea, but it's fine. I did go back and get my GED. I was always a good student. I had 5 brothers and sisters, and they all moved out within like 6 months. It was like the weirdest time of my life. It like just messed me up. And so I just quit. It was just so stupid. I wish I hadn't, but I did. So that might surprise you. Another weird thing, it's probably weird. I read every book twice, literally like back to back. Whenever I finish a book, I like immediately go back to page 1 and read it again. I've been doing that for probably 25 years. I even do it with audiobooks. I just found that like the second time through, like I learn, it's amazing how much you learn the second time through, like how much you missed. So particularly on business books. So I do it twice. Yeah.
So with audiobooks, do you listen to them faster?
I do. It depends on the narrator. Yeah. I mean, some like you speed them up too fast, it sound like the chipmunks, but no, I listen to most podcasts and most audiobooks on 1.25 or 1.5. Depends on who's speaking.
So.
Yeah.
No, I do the same thing. But well, thanks a lot, Ellery. I mean,
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
this is. I think everybody that hears this will be. Um, I will learn quite a bit. Again, I've already said it, but just I've always admired just your ability to pivot and just your resilience in the space. How many products you've built over the years, and the success you've had with each one, and the reputation you've built in the space, and you've done things for the right reason, and really stuck to your values, and that's just been it's been awesome to watch, and yeah, and great to build a friendship with you. So
I
thanks for
feel
taking
the
the
same
time
way.
today.
This is such a great space, man. I mean, I've met, again, like you said, I've got some of my best friends are funeral directors and homeowners, and they're just some of the most empathetic people you'll ever meet. And I love them to death. And so, I mean, I wish every funeral home owner well. And like the one thing I always worry about is commoditization. And I think there's a real opportunity between the funeral homes and the vendors and the people in the space that are the change makers to work together to really kind of, I mean, like families need us, right? They do. I think that a lot of them that, go around a funeral home, I think, one day they probably regret it. You know what I mean? So I think it's our job to sort of, help the funeral home owners, share what they do, share the value that they provide. But it's a great space, and I love everybody in it, especially the vendors on the vendor side. We're always just like a family showing up at conventions, so
Yeah,
it's fun.
a couple family reunions a year. It's great.
That's right. So,
Well, thanks again, Ellery.
yeah, absolutely, Curtis.
Welcome to PodCasket. Got shares in a while.